In this section of training, we are going to explore some of the most common suffixes. We'll provide a summary of important teacher tips to enhance our instruction. We'll explore some oral language activities that might be beneficial for our at-risk learners. First on our list is suffix s versus suffix es. In thinking about them for just a moment, we realize they both accomplish the same goal. When we add either to the end of a noun, we've created a plural noun. When we add either to the end of a verb, we're showing action for subject-verb agreement. So why is it that we really need two suffixes if they do the exact same job? Well, the reason has to do with this concept of co-articulation, or the way that we say one sound and run it into the next. If we were to say the word glass, and we wanted to add suffix s to the end, it would simply become glass, and that final sound would just get stretched. That might make it harder for a listener to determine that we were really talking about more than one glass. The same thing would happen with the word fox. If I just wanted to add a suffix s to the end, I would have fox, creating the same problem of not allowing the listener the benefit of knowing that I meant more than one fox. So suffix es then, instead, creates a buffer vowel between those two sibilants or hissing sounds. So glass becomes glasses, and as a listener, I hear es and its meaning of more than one. Same with fox. Fox becomes foxes, telling me as a listener that the speaker meant more than one. There is a specific category of ending sounds that are sibilants or hissy sounds that will take suffix es instead of suffix s. In a moment, you'll see a brief video modeling this little jingle you're going to hear me say to support students in retaining which sounds will take suffix es versus suffix s. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a list. Words that end in ch, sh, s, x, or z. Add es and you'll please me. That's the little jingle that you're going to see demonstrated in just a moment. The script that you see on the screen is just a suggested conversation that you may have with students to explain the concept that we just went over with you about why we need a suffix es and why suffix s is not good enough. Here's the exercise that we do that may come in handy. On the screen now, you're seeing the script that gives some information about the hand motions that we would use to teach this jingle of when to use suffix es. I will point out that the very beginning part of the script is important, and a lot of times people leave it off. You want to make sure that students understand that when the word ends, it's the ending sound that determines if suffix s or es is correct. When the word ends in, and then you're naming the patterns that are there. If it ends in one of these patterns, they would add es. If you don't say that pattern in this list, then by default, they would add suffix s. Now we're going to watch a brief video on how this little jingle with hand motions works.
Let's look at the es jingle in application. When a word ends in ch, sh, s, x, or z, add es and you'll please me. Now do that with me. When a word ends in ch, sh, s, x, or z, add es and you'll please me. So a question that we get often is, which hand should I start with? Should I, start with my palms down or my palms up? And it really doesn't matter as long as you're consistent and that you're doing it the same every time.
We would like for you to apply this concept to determine if suffix s or suffix es is the right choice for the words below. Notice that on this worksheet, these are not real words. The reason we have not given you real words is that as adult readers, you likely have a visual memory, or you already automatically know what the best spelling choice is, and you won't have to rely on the rule that has just been taught. We want to put you in the student's shoes for just a moment so that you remember what it's like to experience the struggle of learning a new rule like this. The way the activity works is you first read the base words. You're going to pronounce the base word, and then you're going to look at the last grapheme, so the last spelling pattern. When we say grapheme, we're talking about the spelling for a sound. In this first example, tish, it's not the last letter. That would be H. It's the last grapheme, so SH. SH is the ending pattern, and if SH is in our jingle, then we would add suffix ES. In the right-hand column, you would write TISHES, and then you'd pronounce it, just for fun, tishes. Now, complete the activity looking at the ending grapheme and figuring out if suffix S or ES is appropriate. At this time, please pause the video and complete the activity. Please resume the video when you're ready to check your answers on the next screen. All right, let's check our answers. Tish ends in SH, so we had to add ES. To swall, we added S. Nelp, S. Ask, S. Riz, it ends in Z, so we need to add ES. Druss ends in S, so we need to add ES. Rick, S. Yumpsh ends in CH, so we need to add ES. Quicks ends in X, so we need to add ES. Using that jingle, if we say that pattern, we add ES. So CH, SH, S, X, or Z, add ES, and you'll please me. And if you're not sure about your pronunciation, we'll walk you through those quickly. Tishes, swalls, nelps, osks, rizzes, drusses, ricks, yumpches, quickses. The last one is a little bit of a tongue twister. Once we've taught this concept of suffix ES, one of the things that we end up discovering is that students overgeneralize. And so when they go to decode words, anytime they see an ES at the end, they assume it's suffix ES, and they pronounce it is. Then they see words like SHAPES, and instead of pronouncing it shapes, they chop off the end suffix ES and they pronounce it shape is, or shap is, and we have to address that. Here's the fix when that happens. If the student chops off suffix ES, they should look at the letter that came before. What they should see is a CH, SH, S, X, or Z, and since when I chopped off suffix ES in this example, I see the letter P. That tells me that there was not a suffix ES added on this word. It must be suffix S instead. Then we support them to chop off suffix S. They're able to recognize the base word shape, and then they just add the sound for suffix S, which would be S or Z. So, shapes. Same thing in the next example. They mispronounce it as ridiz or ridiz. We're going to ask them, let's see what letter comes before ES. It's a D. Is D one of those letters that gets suffix ES added? No, it's not. So then our suffix isn't ES, it's suffix S. So let's chop that off instead. And now we see that our base word is ride. And so our word is rides. Once we've worked that out, at times our jingle doesn't address all their needs. For words that end with the S sound or J sound, S or J, when we attempt to form plural by adding S, we have two hissing sounds merging into one continuous sound, which doesn't work well. So the plural form uses ES, dances, cages, judges. Most students have a broad enough vocabulary and naturally produce the correct pronunciation. However, if your students need additional support, we suggest some oral language activities. At this point in the instruction, while we would like them to read these words, spelling would be unfair until you have taught the suffix addition rule of eDrop, which we'll see in the next video. In your manual, you have some space to practice walking through the explanation that I modeled for you regarding chopping off suffix ES or suffix S, and which one really was added to the word. Again, this is an optional activity if you feel like you'd like to practice explaining that to a student. The next suffix I'd like to talk about is suffix ed. When we add suffix ed to the end of a verb, it tells us that the action already happened or happened in the past. Suffix ed can be problematic from an articulation perspective. That's because it has three possible pronunciations. Suffix ed can say id, d, or t. Those are the three sounds. I want to talk about id for just a moment. It is a dialect pronunciation. Depending on where you're from, you may pronounce it id, as if it's a short I, or ud, as if it's a short U, or a schwa sound. Either way is appropriate. It's a dialect issue. The issue that many students have is this overgeneralization problem. We often hear students think that every time ed is added to a word, it takes that id or ud pronunciation. And so we end up with students saying things like walk-id, I walk-id to the store, or I play-id with my friend. First, teach the id pronunciation, and we teach students a little tool that will help them know not to overgeneralize that sound. If the base word ends in a letter D or a letter T, then the suffix ed will say id. Looking at the examples at the bottom of the page, we have land. Since it ends with the letter D, suffix ed will say id, so landed. Hunt ends with the letter T, so when we add suffix ed, it says id, hunted. Our very first introduction of suffix ed in our lessons on our website starts with this process of just teaching that first pronunciation of ed and supporting students to understand that ed only says id if the last letter in the base word is a D or a T. Now let's look at the other two pronunciations for suffix ed. Fortunately, most students have a strong enough oral language bank that they choose the appropriate pronunciation without having to give this any real thought. It is instead our English language learners and those students who don't have strong oral language foundations that may need more work. We'll talk about how to support them in just a moment. The explanation that I'm going to give you right now, just to be clear, is not added in our lesson plans as information for students. This is teacher information to give you the knowledge to support students who might need this instruction. At the top of your screen, you'll see suffix ed says d after a base word that ends in a voiced sound. Let's do a quick review of voiced versus unvoiced. Take one hand and put it on your throat, and place your other hand just in front of your lips. We're going to practice saying the sound for the letter D 3 times. So we have d, d, d. And you should feel a little bit of a vibration in your throat as you say that sound. Now let's contrast that to the sound that the letter T makes. 3 times, same process. T, t, t. For the letter T, we didn't feel the vibration as much in our throat. We felt it more on our hand in front of our lips. That's considered an unvoiced sound. The reason we need to know that is that in words that end with a voiced sound, suffix ed will also take the voiced sound of d. If a base word ends in an unvoiced final sound, then ed will also take the unvoiced sound of t. Let's try that with some of the examples on the screen. Let's skip to the middle column for the word plug. We're going to isolate that last sound, g. Let's say that 3 times again with our hands in those positions on our throat and in front of our lips. We have g, g, g. As I say that, I feel that vibration in my throat, so that tells me this is a voiced sound. Therefore, suffix ed will also take the voiced sound of d. Let's say the word now, plugged. It matched, so voiced to voiced. Let's go back to the left column to the word play. Try play. If we say A, you may feel that voiced vibration, but it's not going to be as noticeable. One thing you need to know about vowels is that all vowels are considered voiced. Since this word is ending in a vowel sound A, then suffix ed will also take the voiced sound d, so played. To help you work through this concept, say the ending sound in the base word with that hand position to see if you feel that vibration in your throat. Looking at the next bank of words, let's try that with some unvoiced ending sounds. The word rush. Let's say the sh sound. So we have sh. I feel that on the hand in front of my lips, not in my throat. That means ed will take the unvoiced t sound. So rushed. Just being able to feel the difference should help guide you toward the correct pronunciation. The points that I made are shown at the bottom of your screen. Most students will not need this level of instruction. They'll naturally pick the correct sound because they know that when jump happened in the past, it's jumped, and not jumped. Another point is that the reason why matching voiced to voiced and unvoiced to unvoiced is a good rule to remember is that adding the wrong ed sound to the end of a word may make it difficult to articulate. For example, try to say jump with a d sound, so jumped is actually harder to say than jumped. Most of the time, your mouth will choose the natural articulation pattern. Voiced to voiced and unvoiced to unvoiced is more natural and easier to pronounce. Those students who need support may find it beneficial to do some oral language activities similar to the ones in the first grade lesson plans, where we go through oral exercises such as, today, I jump, yesterday, I jumped. Using these oral activities, students hear words over and over again and start to build oral language foundations for appropriate sounds. If that is not enough, then working on the activity that we just did, of identifying the ending sound and whether it's voiced or unvoiced, might be a necessary step. I'd also like to point out this resource in your manual. You'll see the chart that has classified sounds into their voiced and unvoiced categories. If this is something that's beneficial for you to have as a reference tool, we want you to know that it's here, as well as that reminder about voiced to voiced and unvoiced to unvoiced. In your manual, you have a practice activity similar to the one that you see on the screen. We would like for you to apply this concept of the pronunciation of ed and whether it's saying id, d, or t, and classify the words in the word bank in the appropriate column. The first column on the far left represents ed saying id or ud. The middle column, ed says d, and the right column would be ed says t. To help you understand that, this is a concept that as English speakers and adult readers, we take for granted. There will be students that have difficulty with this concept. We have given you nonsense words so that you know what this experience is like for those students. Looking at the first word in the upper left-hand corner, we see W-U-S-H-E-D. So wush is the base word. Would it say wushid, wushed, or wushed? First, I know I can eliminate the id pronunciation because the base word does not end in a D or a T. It's not going to say id. Now I need to decide if it's wushed or wushed. I may feel that naturally it's easier for me to say wushed. That comes out easier, and that might be a safe bet, so I'm ready to move on. If I'm not sure, I'm going to isolate the ending sound sh. So sh is unvoiced. That means ed will say t, which is also unvoiced, so I'm going to put it in the right column. Let's go down the left column and do the next one together. So I see my base word, sint. It ends with a T. That's an easy one. That means ed will say id, so sinted. This last one is tricky, which is why we're going to do this one together before I let you finish this on your own. My base word could either be thith or thith. We don't know if that th is voiced or unvoiced. If it's thith, th sound is unvoiced, so the word would be vithed, and I would put it in the ed says t column. But it could also be vith, with that th making the voiced sound. If that were the case, ed would say d, vithed. So I'm also going to record it in that column, since this is a nonsense word and it could be pronounced either way. That was the last one that was problematic, so I think you're good to finish this activity on your own. Go ahead and pause the video to complete this activity. When you're ready to resume, we'll check our answers. Let's check our work. In the column where ed says ud, we should only see base words that end in a d or a t. So we have sinted, ganted, hackted, and drunted. In the suffix ed says d column, we should have base words that all end in a voiced sound. So vithed, hymned, sprilled, welled. In the column where ed says t, we should only have base words that end with an unvoiced sound. So whooshed, vithed, glanked, twixt, and blumped. Lots of new information for some of us, and practicing these concepts using nonsense words gives us an idea how this might feel for students. Just a quick note, we would not give students an activity like this, especially with nonsense words. But there is guidance in our lesson plans about how to support students through doing sorting, spelling, and reading of words with these patterns. That concludes the Common Suffix Rules and Information section of training.